Today I'm taking a look at the Microdial Tapering Jig. I'm really excited to show you this jig today because it is a huge safety feature, especially for a notoriously dangerous tool, the table saw. Whenever you're cutting small or narrow parts on the table saw, you want to make sure you've got some kind of jig that's going to hold those pieces nicely in place, keeping your hands far away from that spinning blade. And that's exactly what this tapering jig does, especially for things like long, skinny table legs. So let's go ahead and check it out. Inside the box is the jig itself, a handle, hardware pack, and of course an instruction manual. It only took a couple of minutes to get everything onto the main jig here. I started with the handle here at the back, then a couple of memory blocks, trailing block, and finally just some knobs for attaching an optional gripper to the tapering jig. Let's go ahead and take this tapering jig over to the table saw and try it out. Now when you see me using the tapering jig, I'm going to use it with another product by the same manufacturer, which is the Microjig Grr-ripper. This is a really fancy, awesome push block that I use all the time on the table saw, especially for small and narrow parts or making narrow cuts. Keeps your hand well away from the blade. This product works flawlessly with the jig, and the manufacturer recommends using them together for keeping your hands well away and safe, and I definitely recommend using them in combination. Over here at the table saw, I'm going to show you how to cut a four-sided tapered leg. A very typical operation. So we'll have tapers on four sides of our leg. Now, the jig here can be set up a couple of different ways. I'm first going to show you how to set it up by line, just a layout line, and we'll set up the jig that way. But there's a couple of different ways I'll show you after that. So the first thing I want to do is my blade is parallel to my miter slot. So I'm going to use the miter slot to help me align the jig. So I'm going to line up my blank here, leg blank. I've marked out where I want the taper to be along the edge. And I'm going to line that up here on my miter slot. So I'll get the fence out of the way. And I'm going to line it up pretty much anywhere. The top of the leg is up here. Line that up. Bottom of the leg, you've got a tick mark, and put that right on the miter slot. Then what I'll do is go ahead and bring the jig over and bring my fence over approximately where I want it. And anywhere along the jig, line up leg blank against the jig, and then slide out taper part here so that it's hitting my fence. Now, everything got knocked a little bit, so I'll go ahead and readjust. Slide my leg blank until it's two tick marks front and back are just where I want it. Again, get the jig right next to my leg and also right next to my fence. Now you can slide the leg blank forward and back. It doesn't have to be against the stop yet. The angle is the same no matter where it is along the jig, of course. So you can, once you get things pretty set where you think they go, get a tight jig, tight against your fence locked down, then slide your leg back and forth till the front is just where you want it. Check the back, mine's off just a touch. So I'll loosen that, slide my jig out just a little bit, tighten the jig down again, double check, and now it's looking pretty good. I got the jig angle set up right where I want it to be, and I'm getting ready to make my cut. Now I've got my jig set up to the correct angle and I've locked it in with the knob here at the back. You always want to make sure that that knob is locked. Any of the other knobs for setting up the angle of the jig aren't meant for keeping the jig in place. You always want to lock the knob here at the back to make sure that your angle is set and you're ready to go. Now there's a little hook at the back of the jig and my leg blank will rest right on that hook so I can move the jig and it's going to move my blank. Now there's no way I'm holding this piece of wood against this jig running it through like this. This leg is way too skinny to hold safely near the spinning blade here, and so that is where the gripper comes into play. The gripper can attach to this jig and that's going to help hold my leg blank. So I'll go ahead and slide in the gripper here at the back and lock down these two locking knobs here, and that holds the gripper onto the jig. Lock both of those down, and now the gripper can also ride up and down, so I'll raise it all the way up, slide my blank in place, lower it down and lock in the correct height for my jig there. Now, I've got the jig here, the gripper here in place, and it's now holding this, keeping my hand well out of the way. However, the gripper is hanging out over space here, and it's hard to keep good pressure right down on this skinny leg. So that is where this little other arm comes into play. Go ahead and attach that with the two knobs here. And then this will support the other side of the gripper. You can raise and lower that. Now, unfortunately, my leg is high enough that this leg, this optional support here, doesn't reach the table. So I'm going to have to yet again grab a little sacrificial block here. And I can raise that up, slide my block underneath, lower it back down, and then I'll go ahead and just attach that with a couple of temporary screws here. And then I'll have support on both sides of the gripper, good support. We're going ahead and making this cut. Now the jig angle is set, and I've got the gripper set up for my blank. I'm going to go ahead and slide the rip fence over until the leading edge here is just going to touch my mark. Slide that fence over until the blade is just going to touch or just miss the very top mark here. Obviously want to raise my blade all the way up so it's over, just going to go over my workpiece. And also want to double check that nothing's going to catch here at the back, my gripper here at the back. The blade's going to pass through underneath, no problem, not going to hit anything. And I'm set to make my cut. After that first pass, you can see that I left the line. I've got a tiny bit left there. I had the right angle all the way up and down, but there's a tiny bit of wood left, so I'm just going to slide the rip fence over that tiny bit and make a second pass and just cut my line there, and then we'll go ahead and move on to the other three sides. So here's the cut I just made. Take the blank out. I'm going to go ahead and rotate it to make the next cut. And as I slide it back in, you'll notice that my gripper is no longer hitting the surface. This is now cut, and so it is less thick, obviously, and so my gripper is not reaching down. So I need to loosen all four knobs, 2 on this side, 2 on this side, and go ahead and drop it down. Now, unfortunately, my stop block here is larger than the thickness of my leg at this point. So I'm going to go ahead, remove this block, and drop this outside leg down to the table. Hopefully we've got enough distance there to get through. So I'll just quickly pop this off. Now that leg can drop, the gripper drops, and now I can first set this side, lock that in. Now this gripper is actually at an angle. This top face is now slanted. It's the piece I just cut. So the gripper is actually at an angle, but that's fine. You can definitely do that. You got 2 knobs, front and back, to set it at that angle. Same on this side. Put this against the table and lock it down. So now I've got my gripper securely holding my blank in place against the jig and holding it down. Again, keeping my hands far away from the blade. Now I'm not making any changes to my setup. Rip fence, same position. Jig, exact same position. I just rotated my blank over to cut a new face, slide it against the hook, and I'm all set, ready to make this cut. Now that I've cut 2 tapers out of 4, when I go to flip it for the 3rd and 4th cuts, one of my previously tapered faces will be resting against the side of the jig, and therefore I need to double the angle of my jig. While you think about that, let me tell you a couple other methods you can use for setting the angle of this jig. Another method for setting the angle of this jig is to use rise over run with this scale here in the center of the jig. You can use a rise anywhere from 0 all the way up to 2 inches over a 12-inch run, and you can do any 16th in between using the little stops. Simply lift up, rotate the knob around and use the corresponding color codes. Here I'm on the 0, which is red, and I can set it in at the 0, or I can lift it up, slide it across, and set it into the 12 stop, or 12/16 of an inch rise. If I want to use 1, 5, 9, or 13, the green scale, simply rotate it around to the green, and then it'll drop right into those positive stops. Black scale for 2, 6, 10, and 14, yellow scale for 3, 7, 11, and 15, or free scale here where you can just rotate it anywhere and it won't go into the positive stops, and you can go any single marking in between. Don't forget to lock down the jig when you've got it set at the correct angle. Now while I'm here in the center of the jig, let me show you the handy memory stops. There's one right here, and this sets lower memory stop. Simply raise the knob here, and whatever angle you want to remember, just go ahead and put it right up against there, lock it down, and now if you're doing another angle and you want to come back, boom, it'll stop right there. You can lock down your jig and you've remembered the angle of your jig. A little further back from the center, there's a second memory stop right here, and this one you can set another farther stop, so you can come all the way out. Really big angle here, we'll lock that down, and now I can go back and forth between the two memory stops or somewhere in between, and I can always get back and remember this large angle here. Here at the back of the jig is yet another way to set angles, and this is using degrees. So you can again see the scale from 0 up to 10 degrees, and the same type of knob. The red is for the corresponding red numbers here on the scale, green, black, yellow, and of course free, where it won't go into any of the stops. Now I just use a line marked on my actual leg for setting the angle of my jig and locking it down. Now while it was locked down, I found that angle was actually 2 degrees. I just rotated this knob around, found right where it dropped in, and found that it was at 2 degrees. So in order to double that angle, go ahead, loosen this, lift my knob up, go over to 4 degrees, make sure it's in that stop, lock my jig, and I'm ready to cut my 3rd and 4th tapers. So there it is, making a 4-sided taper leg. That was really fast and easy. Obviously, if I'm doing 4 of these for a table, once the jig is set up for each cut, boom, just run it through 4 times. Fast and easy for setting up, but the most important thing is that it's really safe method for holding your work pieces over that table saw, keeping your hands really far away from that spinning blade. This tapering jig measures about 2 feet in length, so any work pieces around that length, you're going to have great support on this jig. Once you start getting well over 2 feet, you're going to want some auxiliary support mounted to this jig in order to support longer work pieces. I want to show you 2 other operations that you can do with this jig. The first is putting a taper on a wider workpiece. Here I've got a big template, and I want to put a 3-degree edge taper on this side versus the other side instead of making them parallel. So I'll go ahead, take my jig and unlock it, and using the scale at the back, I'll set it on 3 degrees. Then go ahead, lock that down. Got my fence in place, and now I can run the jig right along the fence and run my workpiece here along the jig and put that 3-degree taper on the other side. In this case, I don't need the gripper. I can safely manage this large workpiece with the jig alone and create my perfect 3-degree taper. Another operation that you can do with the jig here is a straight line rip, where you want to create a straight edge, say on something that doesn't have a straight edge already, like this board here. I cut this board out of a log, and so of course I've got a bark edge here, and I want to create a nice straight edge, and I can use the jig for that. First, what I'm going to do is go ahead and take the trailing block off of the jig here, off of the front, and put that over on the back. So it slaps on the back here, and this will help support this piece of workpiece going through the blade. So I'll just screw that down here at the back, the trailing block. Now this piece of wood is a little bit on the smaller side for using this large jig, so I have a support piece that's the same thickness as my workpiece that I'll use to help support the jig. And I'll put the workpiece here at the back right against that trailing block. I've got my jig set up straight, not at any angle at all, and it's running right along my rip fence. And I'll set the workpiece right where I want to cut it, and now I can go ahead and run this whole thing through there and create a nice straight edge here on my piece of wood. I showed you that there are a couple different ways for setting the angle on this jig, making it really easy whether you have a project drawing that gives you rise over run or degrees of taper, or you're just using a layout line. You can use any of those methods right here on this jig. Now when you're making tapered legs, those are long and skinny workpieces, and you need a safe method for holding that workpiece and keeping your hands well away from the spinning blade. And that's exactly what this jig does in combination with the Grr-ripper 200. It's fast, easy, and accurate, and best of all, keeps you safe.